Broadcast started. Beginning data push. Data push is successful. It looks like the video stream is still broken. Yeah? Okay, alright, let's just leave it blank then. If we can't put anything there, then we'll just have to make it audio only. Alright, yeah, looks like we're good to go. Jerry, roll the intro. On 3/2/2185, the Chaos Divers and the SCIA factions, who had been at war with each other for some time, made a peace agreement to cease fire against each other in what was originally called the Treaty of Genesis Prime, which would involve setting up a joint military base on the Genesis Divers' homeworld. However, despite both factions being fully aware of the Genesis Divers' presence and control over the planet, neither faction made any attempts to communicate any information about this treaty with the native population of the planet, and instead waited 2 weeks, those 2 weeks starting on 2/17/2185, to inform the Genesis Divers that they had built a joint military intelligence base on their planet without permission, awareness, or consent of anyone from the original population of the planet. When the Genesis Divers found out about this and asked them to leave, they were told that asking them to, quote, kindly get off our rock, a quote from Genesis Priest, was somehow an insult to the Chaos Divers, who up until this point had only been dismissive and ignorant of these events. And when confronted about this unsanctioned land grab, the SCIA tried to look for any excuse to not apologize or leave, completely ignoring and even flat out denying the holy faith of Genesis Prime's claim to the planet and stating that they, quote, do not need permission to build a joint military intelligence base on another faction's homeworld, and that it was, quote, impossible for a faction to fully control and own their own planet, despite that being exactly what the Chaos Divers had done to 5 planets already. This, of course, resulted in a shouting match between leaders of the Genesis Divers, who wanted them to have their planet to themselves, as they already had enough problems being constantly invaded and attacked and having genocide committed against them, and the SCIA, who was looking for any possible excuse to not respect the wishes of the holy faith of Genesis Prime, showing complete disregard for the native population, their safety, or their right to be a sovereign separatist state. However, eventually the SCIA could be bothered to act with the bare minimum of common decency and leave the planet that they were actively invading. The SCIA requested a full 24 hours to leave the planet. When told they would be given 18 hours, they then asked for 20, but eventually were made to agree to 18, upon which they called 7 heavy destroyers into orbit and utilized excessive amounts of armed forces simply to transport their equipment off-world, continuously threatening the Genesis Divers and refusing to behave in a reasonable, decent manner. The holy faith of Genesis Prime made 4 demands to these factions. Quote, firstly, we want that outpost to be moved to literally any other planet. We don't care which, just get out. The second being, secondly, we want the incredibly rude mistake to be acknowledged publicly by both factions in the treaty. Thirdly, we want the Chaos Divers to publicly state whether or not the Genesis Divers are allies with them or not, because to our face we are told we are allies, but anytime we are in contact with CD, nobody knows who we are. And finally, we want an agreement that says in writing that no decisions will be made about the holy faith of Genesis Prime, the Genesis Divers, or the citizens of Genesis Prime without our direct input and a final say in any decision pertaining to or relating to the mentioned groups. End quote. The first demand was met with quite some resistance, but eventually both the Chaos Divers and the SCIA left the planet, with the last SCIA troops leaving the planet at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on 3/3/2185. After setting fire to the remaining buildings and resources of their illegal outpost to ensure that the holy faith of Genesis Prime couldn't use the resources to help rebuild parts of their cities and homes. The second demand was only partially met, as both factions apologized privately to the Genesis Divers, though made no efforts to publicly acknowledge their mistake. The second demand was also only partially met, as the Chaos Divers made their list of allies publicly available to all members of their faction, but did not clearly specify that they were allies with the Genesis Divers, effectively proving that they had no investment or care in the alliance itself, and as such it was broken off by the Genesis Divers. And the final demand was not met, and instead was completely ignored by both the Chaos Divers and the SCIA, who refused to even entertain an agreement that would help to ensure the safety, sovereignty, prosperity, and free will of Genesis Prime. Issue start date 2/17/2185, issue end date 3/3/2185. Due to these recent events, the High Council cast their votes early this afternoon to decide what should be done in response to this major offense against their people, and through a unanimous vote, all of the High Council members voted to end any and all alliances and connections with the Chaos Divers for the foreseeable future. This is both due to the major insult against the people and citizens of Genesis Prime recently, as well as several smaller long-standing issues regarding the Chaos Divers' treatment of the Genesis Divers faction. The Council also shared unanimous votes to reinstate Project Otis, their previous active order given to them directly by the High Priestess of the Holy Faith of Genesis Prime, in an attempt to provide the people with a more secure and effective defense system. Of course, with Otis being an acronym for Orbital Defense Inertia Sapper, or the Otis Defense Net, if one is referring to its full contents, which of course originally was supposed to include a startling 100 orbital 500mm rail cannon placements to form a weave of mobile orbital sentries controlled by their planetary defense system, Jerry, as well as 500 anti-air emplacements localized around the 6 holy cities of Genesis Prime, and 50 ground-based heavy radar stations for the purposes of deep space monitoring and the active scanning of all material within 14 light-years of Genesis Prime, including its territory world Outpost 32 to the west and its close allies to the Psycho Force in the east, as well as all neighboring sectors. Though, of course, the original attempt at Project Otis failed miserably due to a lack of participation, the High Council assumes that due to these recent events, the Genesis Divers will be more willing to help effectively and efficiently build a successful, effective, and efficient, yes, I know I'm saying that multiple times, defense net around their planet in order to prevent such things from happening again. And finally, the Council approved a motion to increase recruitment attempts off-world to try to bring more people into the Genesis Divers and the Holy Faith of Genesis Prime. So look forward to expecting more people in the Genesis Divers faction very soon. That's all from this broadcast. Thanks for tuning in.